We are beginning Shagged Simin Yud-Zayin. Simin Yud-Zayin speaks about when the latest time is that you can daven Mincha, and it's the longest Simin, I believe, in Shagged. It's going to take us, I would say, at least 3 weeks to get through it. I printed out just the first page of the Mara Makomos for tonight.
Mincha is the longest.
Mincha. No, still, huh?
Mincha.
Sure, right. But the discussion here is very long. I wouldn't say it's extremely difficult, but there's like lengthy discussions. So we're going to have to, hopefully I'll help refocus, what we're trying to prove at each step, and we'll work through it step by step. So let's begin with the Mishnah in Brachos, Daf Chavav Amud Aleph, which is the first Mar Makom. And it says, since we're having a few weeks, so the fact that the first page didn't print, I'm doing it by Pef. If I miss anything, I'll throw it in next week. Okay, so the Mishnah says, Tfilas HaShachar ad Chatzos. It's a Mishnah that Shachris is until Chatzos. Rav Yehuda Omer ad Dalet Shos. Rav Yehuda says until 4 hours into the day. Tfilas HaMincha ad Ha'erev. Tfilas HaMincha is till the evening. Rav Yehuda Omer ad Plag HaMincha. Rav Yehuda says until Plag. Now, we're not going to really discuss so much, although it will come up in the discussion, the psak in regards to Rav Yehuda and the Chachamim. We paskin for Mincha, you can do whichever way you want. So you can daven Mincha until Plag, and then you could have Marav after Plag, or you could daven Mincha until Ha'erev, and then you could have Marav afterwards. We're going to discuss this Shirs, or this Simin, so the next few Shirim, is discussing what does the Chachamim mean when they say Ad Ha'erev. What does Ad Ha'erev mean? So, let's see what the Rabbeinu Yonah says. Rabbeinu Yonah says on that Mishnah, and it's the second Mara Makom, he says, Tfilas HaMincha ad Ha'erev. Tfilas HaMincha is till the evening. Ein lefarish ad Yitzias HaKochavim. Don't explain that it's all the way until Yitzias Kochavim, Shehu Laila Mamish, which is the actual night. Dal Karchach les lan lemimar dad Ha'erev ha'amar bekan, Eino Ratzalomar el Ashkisachama. You have to say that when it says Ad Ha'erev, it means until Shkia. And you can't daven after Shkia. Why? How does he know that? Mishum dahachi amrin b'zvachim, because we say in Zvachim, Dafon Vav Amud Aleph, Minayin lidam shenifsal b'Shkias Hachama. How do we know that the blood becomes puzzle at Shkias Hachama? Ratzalomar, what that means is, the Mishkias Hachama ve'ilech, Enuzman Zrikas Dam Tamid. Shalbein Arbayim. From Shkia on, you can no longer sprinkle the blood of the Tamid Shalbein Arbayim, because the Gemara says that the blood is already puzzle at that point. Utfias HaMincha, he keneged Tamid Shalbein Arbayim, and we know that the Tfilas HaMincha and its Zman is keneged the Tamid Shalbein Arbayim. The Ikar HaTamid hu Zrikas Adam, and the main part of the Tamid is the Zrika, so therefore the Tefillah should have to be at the time that you could do a Zrika. Vekihechi shezrikas Adam ein zmana el ashkias achama, and if I can only sprinkle the blood of the carbon Tamid until Shkia, hachanami, here also Tfilas HaMincha shenitkana kenegda, so Mincha, which is opposite that Tamid, or the Zrikas Dam of that Tamid, ein zmana el ashkias achama bilvat. So its time can only be until Shkia. Right? This we know is that the reason for all the Zmanim of the Tefillah is based on the Zmanim of the Karbanos that they represent. So he's explaining, and it seems to be fairly straightforward, that since it's a clear Gemara, which we'll see inside in a second, because we're going to need parts of it for our later discussion, since it's clear from the Gemara in Zvachim that the Zman of the carbon Tamid is only until Shkia, so then that means also the Mincha Tefillah can only be till Shkia, and you can't daven after Shkia. So, I'm going to say something. So this Shir, or this whole Simin, we're going to actually be dealing a lot with Gemaras that speak about Kodshim. If you think we're talking about Tefillah, so we're going to be mostly dealing with Gemaras and Brachos about davening, but the fact that it's connected to the Karbanos means that in fact we're going to be dealing with a lot of Kodshim Gemaras, which may be a little bit more difficult for people that aren't familiar with them, but we'll see them as we get to them. Says the Gemara in Zvachim Daf Nun Vav Amud Aleph, which is the third Mara Makom, Amar of Yitzchak bar Avudimi, Minayin ledam shenifsal b'shkias hachama. How do we know that the blood becomes pasul at shkia. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, biyom hakrivo es zivcho yeachel. That the day that you bring the carbon, that's when you have to eat the meat of the carbon. Biyom shato zoveach ato makriv. The day that you shecht the carbon, that's the day that you're makriv. Biyom she'iato zoveach iato makriv. And the day that you don't shecht it is when you're not makriv. So makriv here refers to the sprinkling of the blood. Because those are the two, there's really four main avodos that apply to all karbanos, all animal karbanos. There's the shchita, the kabbalas hadam, catching the blood in the kli, holachas hadam, you take the blood to the mizbeach, and zrikas hadam, you sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach. Right, so those are the four avodos, and mostly we'll be talking about the shchita and the zrika. And over here, the Gemara is telling us that you have to shecht it and sprinkle the blood on the same day. The Gemara asks, but we need the pasuk for itself. In other words, the pasuk, the pashtus of the pasuk, is telling us when you're allowed to eat the carbon. It's not telling us when you could sprinkle the blood of the carbon. And so therefore, how are you making the drasha of the time you're supposed to sprinkle the blood? Because if that would be so, Ne'emar Kra, the pasuk should have said, B'yom zivcho yeachel, that you should eat the carbon on the day that you shechted it. Hikrivu lamali, why does it use the word hikrivu, which seems to have something to do with the sprinkling of the blood as well? Shma Mina comes to teach us, biyom shata zoveach ato makriv. The same day you shecht should be when you sprinkle the blood. Biyom shi'ata zoveach, if it's not the day you shechted, yato makriv, you can't sprinkle the blood. And the Gemara asks, V'dilma hachi kamar achmana, maybe the pasuk means as follows. I karev dam ha'idna, nis'achel basar ha'idna. If you brought the blood today, then you eat the meat today. Ulamachar, and you can eat it the next day. In other words, we're talking about a carbon that can be eaten 2 days. The day you sprinkle the blood and the next day. Ikar of dam lamachar, and if you sprinkle the blood the next day, nis'achel basar lamachar ulyom uchar, then you can eat the meat starting the next day and the third day. In other words, you always get 2 days starting from the day you sprinkle the blood. But it wouldn't be telling us when you have to sprinkle the blood. Right? You could shecht, let's say I could shecht the carbon today and Monday. I could sprinkle the blood tomorrow, Tuesday, and then I could eat the carbon until Wednesday. Maybe that's what the pasuk is telling us. So Gemara says, no, it can't be telling us that because, if that would be so, Ne'emar Kra b'yom hakrivu yeachel. It should just say the day that you sprinkle the blood, the hikrivu, as we explained, seems to be referring to the sprinkling of the blood. That's the day you start eating the carbon. Zivcho lamli, why does it use the word zivcho? And zivcho always, the word zevach, usually is referring to shchita. Shma Mina, so it must be teaching us biyom shato zeveach ato makrivo. The day you shecht is also when you sprinkle the blood. Biyom she'yato zeveach, if it's not the day you shechted, yato makrivo, you can't sprinkle the blood. So basically what's telling us, I can't sprinkle the blood on the next day. I have to sprinkle it the same day that I brought the carbon. Now somehow, this teaches us, at least according to the pashtus of the Gemara, this teaches us something about how the blood becomes pasul at shkia. Right, which is a little bit not so clear, because who says, and the day does not end at shkia, the day really ends at Teisus Kochavim, so it's clear from the pasuk I have to sprinkle the blood that day. But why does that day end at shkia? It's not so clear. And Tosfos discusses it. There's a Tosfos in Menachos Daf Chaf Amud Beis, and that's going to be, we're going to see that entirely inside. And instead of bringing a photocopy of the Tosfos, I did like a outline version of the Tosfos, because it's so long, and it would be very difficult to just go through it, with a big block of text. It'll be easier to see it this way. So Tosfos in Menachos is actually explaining this Gemara in Zvachim. There's also a Tosfos in Zvachim, right, on the place, which also explains it. The Shaggai brought the source in Menachos, so that's the one we're going to see inside. The one in Zvachim is slightly different. We're going to see maybe a quote from that at a later point. But we're going to go through it step by step, what he says in Maseches Menachos Daf Chaf Amud Beis Divrei Maschil Nifsal, which is the fourth Ma'ar Mokum on the sheet. Okay, so he's going to have a few ideas over here. We'll try to keep focus. So Nifsal Dam B'Shkias Acham Kamosa. So it's one of the examples the Gemara is bringing over there when it's comparing, contrasting things. It says that the blood becomes pasul at shkia. And right, the word dam is not in there. I added in just to explain what the Indian is talking about. So basically, the Gemara over there is referencing this halacha that we said in the Gemara Zvachim, that the blood becomes pasul at shkia. Bereish misha hayatame. This is found in the beginning of the parak misha hayatame, which is the Gemara we quoted above. Damrinon, we say the mishkias achama atzeis hakochavim dalid milin l'Reb Yehuda. So we say. No, sorry, Misha Yatami is referring to something else. So over there, in Misha Yatami, we say the following. From Shkia until Tseis is 4 mil. Right, 4 mil, we generally understand a mil, we're going to just go with the pashtus, even though there are different shitas, but if a mil is 18 minutes, so in between Shkia until Tseis is 72 minutes. Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda. So Hiksha Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam had a question on this. The Besof Madlikin, at the end of the Madlikin, Mashma del Rabbi Yehuda, Misha Tishka Hachama, Ad Halayla, Shnei Chelki Mil. That from Shkia until Tzeisa Kochavim, right, Laila is just another word for Tzeisa Kochavim, they're the same thing, is only 2/3 of a mil. 2/3 of a mil is only 13.5 minutes. Right? It's a terribly big discrepancy between two Gemaras. We spoke about this a little bit in the Chanukah Shir, if you remember. There's a major discrepancy between how much time there is between Shkia and Seis. One Gemara says 72 minutes. One Gemara says 13.5 minutes. V'tir Rabbeinu Tam, and therefore Rabbeinu Tam is mitaritz. Demisha tishka hachama, mashma sof shkias hachama, shekvar shaka hachama. When the Gemara uses the word misha tishka, so it's referring to the end of Shkia, which is sometime after the sun already went down. Aval mishkias achama, but if he uses the word shkias achama, mashma mitchias Shkia, that's from the beginning of Shkia. So basically, according to Rabbeinu Tam, there are two words which refer to Shkia. They seem very similar. There's Misha Tishka and Shkias. Misha Tishka is much later than Shkias. So from Shkias achama until Tzeisa Kochavim, which is the Gemara from Misha Hayatame, which is, I think is Gemara in Psachim. So there, 72 minutes. But from Misha Tishka Chama, which is the Lashon that he uses in Memadlikin, until Tzeisa Kochavim is only 13.5 minutes. Teidan, you should know this is true. Midam Rinan Gabi near Chanukah, we say by Chanukah, Misha Tishka Chama, that you light near Chanukah, Misha Tishka. The ibet chias shkia, if you would light candles, the Chanukah candles in the beginning of Shkia, adayin hu yom gadol, so it's still the middle of the day, or not the middle of the day, but still very light. The have shraga v'tiara, that would be lighting a candle during the daytime, and that would something which would not be recognizable. People wouldn't see it, and therefore it can't be that that's the time of lighting candles is in the beginning of Shkia, when it's still light outside. It must be talking about this much later time, which he refers to as Sof Shkia. And there the Lashon is, as we have underlined it in bold, which is also a little bit helpful in the printout, it uses that Lashon of Misha Tishka. So Tosfos, Rabbeinu Tam, right, is proving himself right from that Lashon, which he says clearly is referring to a much later time than what we would refer to as Shkia. Ulefikach. And therefore, Shkia Sachama Nami, Dahacha, Gabidam, Betchias Shkia Airi. When our Gemara said that the blood becomes pasul at Shkia Sachama, that's the earlier time. That's the beginning of Shkia. V'nicha Tfei, and now that works. Mishum Narmina B'sof Izum Mukoma, because we said in the Gemara in Svachim, Minayin Ledam Shenifsal B'Shkia Sachama, how do we know the blood becomes pasul at Shkia? Shenemar, as the pasuk says, B'yom Hekrivu as Zivcho, that the day you bring the carbon, which remember, Hikrivu is a code word for Zrikas Adam. Zivcho is the code word for shechting the carbon. B'yom Shata Zoveach HaTamakriv teaches us that the day that you shecht is when you sprinkle the blood. V'i B'sof Shkia Kamar, if it's talking about the end of Shkia, Lama Likra, why do I need a pasuk? Pshita Denifsal B'Laila, it's obvious that the blood becomes pasul at Tzeisa Kochavim. Dein Yochel Zarko, you can't sprinkle the blood when it's actually nighttime. Dichsiv b'yom tzavaso, because the pasuk says b'yom tzavaso. That's a pasuk that the Gemara uses to darshan that all avodos in the Beis HaMikdash have to be done specifically during the day and not at night. Va'amad hashachar pshita to poselisbo, and then you can't say that he could bring it the next day, because Amad hashachar certainly would passel the blood. Dum yadei murim, just like the sacrificial parts that are brought on the mizbeach, that if they're left over until the morning, then they become pasul. So the blood, if it's left over in the morning, will be pasul. At night, you can't sprinkle it. So therefore, without any additional pasuk, without any drasha in Zvachim, I would already know that Tzeitzis Chochavim would be the last time you could sprinkle the blood. And therefore, so what Tosfos wants to say, so the whole drasha is obviously coming to give you an earlier time, which is going to be Shkia, right? Tchila Shkia, which is, as far as Rabbeinu time is concerned, is still considered day. Now Rashi, he has a different shot over there, and he wants to explain. The nafkamina im alol lagabi mizbeach, mishum de'in lina mo'alas b'rosh shel mizbeach. The reason why we need those psukim, the drashos and zvachim, the Gemara that we saw, is for a case where he brought the blood onto the mizbeach, and there's a din that there's no lina on top of the mizbeach. If I would bring the sacrificial parts on the mizbeach and leave them there overnight, they wouldn't become pasul. So therefore, the same thing, if I were to bring the blood to the top of the mizbeach and leave it there overnight, it would not become pasul. And then theoretically, without any other drashos, I would allow myself to sprinkle the blood the next day. Right? It's true, all avodos have to be done during the day, but the blood itself wouldn't have become pasul from staying overnight because it stayed overnight on the top of the mizbeach. And then I would take it off the mizbeach and be able to sprinkle it. That's what I would have thought. Therefore, I need the psukim to tell us, no, you can only sprinkle the blood the same day that you shecht. The kasha, but Tosfos doesn't like this shot of Rashi because it's difficult. Lamanda Amar Moelas, Michael Amimar. What are you going to say according to the Shita that there is lina on top of this beach? There's this machlokes tanoim, whether there is or there isn't. So to have a whole drasha, you can't say it's only according to one tana, not the other tana. Ve'in lomar deitzrich mishum dekaimelon gabi dam im alolo yerid. And you also can't say that we need it because we hold that blood that goes on the mizbeach, we don't take it down. Ho v'lon kosher be'emurim, since if you left over the emurim on top of the mizbeach, they would be kosher. V'ma'alei l'gav mizbeach, if you brought it up to the mizbeach, have amin, I would have thought, the yachol Israel, okay, I could sprinkle the blood the next day. Mishum davaha pluksahi, this is also machlokis, Rabbi Gamliel Rabbi Yeshua, between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua, Amar Yirei, Rabbi Yeshua says, if I bring the blood that became possible to the mizbeach, I have to bring it down. Rabbi Gamliel, it's only according to Rabbi Gamliel that I don't have to bring it down. So therefore, both of these concepts, the concept of blood that stayed on this mizbeach overnight doesn't become pasul, or the concept that blood which did become pasul, if I then bring it up on this mizbeach, I don't have to bring it back down, otherwise I could sprinkle it on this mizbeach. Both of those are subject to machlokes, and therefore Tosfos doesn't want to explain the Gemara and Zvachim according to those shitas. Which would then leave us to the only option being that the Gemara and Zvachim is teaching us an additional chiddush to push it back to Shkia. Now, if you're going to say, no, I need the pasuk to teach us that it becomes pasul overnight, because I would have thought it doesn't become pasul. The reason I would have thought that is because blood has special kulas to it. There is no psul of pigul and nosar by blood. Right? So pigul is if a person thinks to do the avodah in the improper time, or nosar if he actually leaves the carbon over past the possible time, so the blood itself doesn't become pasul. Kiddush b'sof kol basar, as it says in Chulin. So therefore I would think since blood has these specific leniencies to it, so maybe it also doesn't become pasul if I leave it over. But we know that there's wood and the lavona, which is brought on the mizbeach. Those are also things that, according to Rabbi Shimon, don't have nosar. Nevertheless, they are pasul with lina, if they became kadosh in a kli sharis. So therefore, we don't have this rule that something that doesn't have these chiyuv and pigul and nosar also is not going to have lina. It's not true. We see that lina applies to everything, even things that don't have nosar. So therefore, this blood does have lina. The psul of lina means if I leave it over till the morning, it itself becomes pasul. And, whether or not bring it to the mizbeach or leave it on the mizbeach helps is subject to machlokes. Therefore, Tosfos doesn't want to explain the Gemara like that. And if you're going to say that Rabbi Shimon only knows that because we learn it from blood, you wouldn't be able to learn from blood because blood is matter, and therefore we just see that there is we don't have this rule of any comparison between Lina and the Chiyuvim of Nosar. But it works out, everything works out according to Rabbeinu Tam, because Rabbeinu Tam says the whole point of the Gemara over there is to teach us that there's a psul of the blood by Shkia, which is an earlier time during the day. That's the whole chiddush of the Gemara there. Now, how do we know Shchita has to be before Shkia? Remember, according to Rabbeinu Tam, Shkia is daytime. So therefore, he's comparing it to Shchita. That seems to be the drasha of the Gemara. What's that drasha? Well, we'll get there eventually. But Tosfos is not explaining it to us, at least not right now. V'chein masher perik misha hayatame, and it's also the mashmos in the Gemara in Pesachim, misha hayatame, which was the perik he was quoting before, right? He didn't have over there the parentheses where that Gemara is, but it's Gemara in Pesachim. De shchita asura mitchiyas shkia. So shchita is also from the beginning of shkia. Now we're getting into that idea of how do you know that shchita is possible from the beginning of shkia. Gabi mishaya b'derech rechoko, because this is a whole new sugya, which we're also going to see eventually inside. It's a Gemara in Pesachim over there, that if someone's far away, he's pater from bringing the Korban Pesach, or at least pater from the chi of kares, if he doesn't bring the Korban Pesach, if he's at a distance. Dekamar Hasam, we explain over there, Izu derech rechoka, how far away does a person have to be in order to be pater from the Korban Pesach? Min hamodiin liyushalayim chamesh asar milan. It's from Modi'in until Yerushalayim, which is 15 mil. Umukach Hasam, and it's clear over there, Dahainu chamisha asar milan mipal gadiyoma, that it's 15 mil from the halfway point of the day, means from Chatzos until 15 mil, that's the time period a person would have to try to walk to get to the Beis HaMikdash, which is ad Shkia Sachama. The 15 mil is only until Shkia. V'lo chashiv daled milin dimishkia Sachama tzeiz chachavim. He's not counting the 4 mil that you could walk between Shkia until Tzeis. Ve'ilo mifsal adam ad tzeiz chachavim. If the blood wasn't possible until Tzeis chachavim, imkain, if so, havisha shchita. That would be the time of shchita. You could still shecht until Tzeis. Alright, so we don't see so clearly from the way Tosfos quoted, although we will see it ourselves inside shortly. But Tosfos is bringing a proof from that Gemara in Zvachim, the Gemara in Pesachim, that the shchita of the Korban Pesach, at least, we're going to discuss that also, whether it's just Korban Pesach or other Korbanos, is only until Shkias Hachama, which, according to Rabbeinu Tam, is still daytime. Umiu kasha, but it's difficult. I betchilas Shkia ka'amar, if we're talking about the beginning of Shkia, heichi memayitla mi biyom hakrivo. How can we learn that from the pasuk that says the day that you sprinkle the blood? Ha'at tzeis kochavim yomhu, we know that it's considered daytime until tzeis. Dichsiv, as the pasuk writes, v'haya lanu halayla mishmar v'hayom malacha. It's learned out from a pasuk in Nehemiah. The Gemara goes through in 2 places, I don't remember exactly where offhand, how we know that that's referring all the way until Tzeis is the daytime. V'yesh lo, I mean, one of them is in Megillah Daf Chafai, so which you're going to eventually quote that Gemara. Not tonight, and probably not next week either. V'yesh lo Omar. So I put here the 3 dots afterwards because we're now skipping in the Tosfos a whole section. But basically, that's the first explanation of Tosfos. So just to recap what we saw, in order so we could, go weiter to see the next piece of Tosfos without getting confused, is that Tosfos is explaining this Gemara in Zvachim, which says that you have to sprinkle the blood before Shkia. It means Tchilas Shkia, which is the Zman, which is 4 mil, 72 minutes before Tzeis, which according to Rabbeinu Tam is still considered 100% daytime. Even though it seems from the Psukim that we're talking about a difference between day and night, it's not actually a difference between day and night. It refers to the daytime, which is kosher for Shchita. And the daytime, which is kosher for Shchita, only goes until Shkia. That's learned out from a different Gemara, which we'll see more in depth later on. And therefore, the sprinkling of the blood also can only be done until Tchilas Shkia, which is 72 minutes before Tzeis. And that fits very well with what we quoted from Rabbeinu Yonah, which wanted to say that because of that, also Tefilas Mincha can only be until Tchilas Shkia, which is 72 minutes before Tzeis. That's what Tosfos said so far. Now Tosfos is going to give a slightly different explanation. And Tosfos says as follows. Yish Lomar, you could say, that you could learn Tchilas Shchita from the word biyom. Dim eno inyan lesof shkia, the nafka biyom tzavaso, teniu inyan letchilas shkia. So another way you can know it's referring to tchilas shkia is because otherwise we don't need that whole drasha. Right? That's really what we pointed out a little bit in the beginning of Tosfos. Is I know that all the avodos have to be done during the day, and I know the blood is going to become pasul overnight. Right, and then he went through all those explanations in Rashi that maybe there's some shitas that it won't become pasul overnight, but Tosfos doesn't want to explain it according to only some shitas. So therefore, the whole drush in Zvachim cannot be teaching us that I have to sprinkle the blood that day until Tzeis HaKochavim, because that's something I know without that whole Gemara. So the whole Gemara must be teaching me a Chiddush, therefore the Chiddush has to be that it's an earlier time, which is Tchilas Shkia, which is 72 minutes before Tzeis HaKochavim. V'yish Mefarshim, some explain that min haTorah eno nifsal ad Tzeis HaKochavim, that really d'oraisa the blood isn't possible until Tzeis. Right? So d'oraisa you really could sprinkle the blood all the way until Tzeis HaKochavim. El Rabbanan Avid Harchaka, the Rabbanan made a takana upaslu mitchilas Shkia. They said that the blood becomes possible from the beginning of Shkia. V'hamidu devreihem b'makom kares l'inyan derech hachoka, and they even were so strong in their shita, in this Takanas Chazal, that they won't even let you bring a Karban Pesach after that time, even though a person that doesn't bring the Karban Pesach is going to be chayav kares, and a d'oraisa could still bring the Karban Pesach, right? He would come to the base of Mikdash, let's say, an hour before Tzeis HaKochavim. He says, I'm here to bring my Karban Pesach. They say, it's too late. They say, but I'm going to be chayav kares. They say, too bad. He says, but d'oraisa I'm allowed to bring it still. They say, too bad, because Chazal say that you can't. That's what it means. They were hamid devrei makom kares leini derech hachoka kadesh use reason lavo, because they want to make people come earlier. They don't want people waiting till the last second. The kasha, but this explanation is difficult. The lich shevei b'psachim b'sofa isha. It should be counted in Gemara Psachim at the end of Perkei Isha. V'hadi hanak shemidu devrei makom kares. Over there, the Gemara brings a list of cases where it's a din derabanan. And nevertheless, they said you can't be over this din d'Rabbanan even if the person's going to be chayav kares because of it. And it gives a list of 3 dinim there. And this is not one of them. Right? According to Tosfos, this could be on the list. Right? It's a din d'Rabbanan that they apply even if the person is chayav kares by following it. V'ish lomar, so the answer is, the lo chashiv ella midi dahavi chiddush. We're only counting things which are a chiddush. Chiddush, this is not a chiddush. I'm talking Kadesh Yamaru Lavo, if the whole takana so they could come earlier, so then obviously they're not going to let the person bring the carbon if he comes late. Because there are a lot of cases there that they don't list in the Gemara. For example, cutting off a wart from an animal. There are certain types of warts that will make the animal pasul because it's a mum, but you could take them off and then the animal would be kosher. You can't take them off on Shabbos. There are ways to take off a wart on Shabbos, which would be a chiyuv d'oraisa on Shabbos, right, a malacha d'oraisa. There are ways you could take it off, which would only be a malacha d'Rabbanan. So if the person, this is his only Karban Pesach that he has, and it's Shabbos over Pesach, and he wants to bring this animal as a Karban, but they check it and it has this blemish on it, it has this wart, and he wants to take it off, so he could be Yotzei's chiyuv Pesach, Karban Pesach, they will not allow him to take it off, even in a way which is only a malacha d'Rabbanan on Shabbos. So that's also a case of hamidu divrei v'makom kares, and the Gemara does not list it because it's just a pashut din. It's a malacha d'Rabbanan, so you can't do it. So even if it's going to be a Karban Pesach, it's going to pass your Karban Pesach. Too bad. And that's something the Gemara has to mention. There are other cases which are similar, also bringing an animal from outside the Tchum. Also a similar case if it was Erev Pesach fell out on Shabbos, and it's Karban Pesach, he didn't bring it inside the Tchum before Shabbos, so now there's an Issur D'Rabbanan to bring objects from outside the Tchum to inside the Tchum, so that he would not be able to do Bahar Kavaso, or to carry it. Carrying a live animal is only a Durabanan, according to some Shitas. Nevertheless, he can't bring the animal on Shabbos, even to bring the Korban Pesach. So basically, Tosfos brought a long list of, or a list of three other cases where it's only a din durabanan, but nevertheless it's going to prevent him from bringing Korban Pesach. So I have now another din durabanan which is going to prevent him from bringing Korban Pesach. Din durabanan is that you have to sprinkle the blood before Shkia. And if he doesn't, so he's not going to be able to bring Korban Pesach. The Gemara doesn't have to list every case. That's the point of Tosfos. Okay. So, basically I had two Shitas in Tosfos. Both of them say that the sprinkling of the blood has to be done before Shkia. Tchila Shkia, 72 minutes before it says Kochavim. But there's a major difference between them. According to the first explanation, it's the Din D'Oraisa. According to the second explanation, it's Din D'Rabbanan. Now, Tosfos said something interesting here. One of the lines of Tosfos was, he said, I besof Shkia ka'amar, lam likra. If it's talking about the end of Shkia, then I don't need the pasuk. Why? He said because it's already pasul at night. You can't sprinkle it the next day because the pasuk says biyom tzavaso. And we know that the blood becomes pasul overnight because of Lina. Right? Tosfos had this whole cheshbon of why it can't be that I need this drasha in Zvachim to teach me that I can't sprinkle the blood the next day. So therefore it must be that the Chiddush is teaching us that I have to go earlier to the Zman of Shkia. That was the Mahalach of the first Shita in Tosfos. It's in D'Oraisa, and I know it because the Drasha in Zvachim obviously has to be telling me that, because it would be impossible for us to think that you could sprinkle the blood the next day. Ask the Shagas Aryeh that Tosfos thinks it would be impossible to have the Havamina, but if you look back in the Gemara we read, the Gemara does have that Havamina. Right? The Gemara says, Vidilma, if you look on the fourth line in Os Gimel, which we saw, right, the Gemara is Zvachim and Vavam about Aleph, the fourth line in the second column, Vidilma hachi kamar achmana. Maybe the pasuk is saying, Ikarav dam ha'idna, if you sprinkle the blood today, Nisacha basar idna, u'lamachar, you could eat the blood today and tomorrow. V'ikarav dam lamachar, and if you sprinkle the blood tomorrow, Nisacha basar lamachar u'urchra, then you could eat the meat starting tomorrow when you sprinkle the blood and the day after. And therefore, imkain nemakrav makarva. So therefore, the Gemara explains the pasuk worded it in this way in order to teach you not to say that I could sprinkle the blood tomorrow. So how is Tosfos saying, oh, without this pasuk, I would have known that I can't sprinkle the blood tomorrow? That's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara seems to be saying, without this pasuk, that is what I would have thought. So Tosfos is explaining the Gemara exactly the opposite of the way the Gemara itself explained the sugya. And therefore, says the Shagas Aryeh, you're going to have to explain like Rashi. Now, remember Rashi said that there are these nafkaminas where it wouldn't become possible if you bring it to the top of the Mizbeach, or Tosfos brought another possibility, even if it wasn't on top of the Mizbeach, but then you bring it to the Mizbeach to give the Shita of Rabban Gamliel. Shagas Aryeh says you have to explain that way. Tosfos didn't want to because he didn't want to limit the Gemara to one Shita. But the Gemara itself limits itself to that Shita. Because the Gemara itself is talking about the case where I left the blood over till tomorrow and I'd be able to sprinkle it except for this special drasha. So therefore the Gemara is limiting itself to those Shitas. So Tosfos didn't want to explain like Rashi because he didn't want to limit himself to those Shitas, but you have no other way to explain it. The Gemara itself is leading us to explain like Rashi and not like Tosfos. That's one question that the Shagas Aryeh asks on Tosfos. A second question that he asks is on the whole Mahalach of Tosfos is very strange. Because if the whole purpose of this drasha is to teach us that you would generally have the entire day until Tzeitzes Chacham to sprinkle the blood, but we're now making it earlier until the beginning of Shkia, the Gemara should have said it a little bit more clearly. Right? The Gemara just starts off saying Shkia. Now I understand. Tosfos says that the word Bishkia Zachama we're supposed to know means that Tchilas Shkia. Right? That's just the way that phrase means. So Tosfos, maybe it's not such a big question of Tosfos. What do you mean? The Gemara did say it, but it doesn't seem the point of the drasha, right? Because the whole drasha, when we get into the drashas, we don't mention anything about Shkia Zachama. We don't mention anything about there being a tzeis, and then we're making it earlier. So therefore, it doesn't seem like that's the point of the Gemara. And furthermore, according to Tosfos, the drasha ends up being what we call an im eno inyan type of drasha, which is the pasuk says something that we already know, and because of that, we say it's not saying what the pashas of the pasuk is saying. It's teaching us an additional chiddush, right? So, for example, in our case, the drasha is from bayom, the word day. Now, day means until tzeisa kochavim. Doesn't mean until shkia. Tosfos explained, more or less, or paraphrasing what Tosfos explained is, well, we don't need the word biyom to tell us that you have until tzeisa kochavim, because that we anyway would know. Because we have a different pasuk, biyom savaso, we have this problem of lina, right? All of the arguments that Tosfos gave. And therefore it's like an eno inyan type of drasha. Since I don't need the pasuk to teach us about tzeisa kochavim, so it's going to teach us a bigger chiddush and it's going to push it back until shkia. When the Gemara makes those types of drashas, it usually spells it out. Right? It says, right, the pasuk says day, which would be until tzeis. But I already know until tzeis, so therefore I'm moving it back to shkia. Here the Gemara didn't say that, it just ends off. We learn out from the pasuk, it says biyom. Finished. It sounds like it's a very pasha drasha, not a drasha where it's teaching me something I already know, and therefore I'm going to take the pasuk out of context. That the Gemara usually has to explain. So that's another reason why the Shagas Aryeh doesn't like this explanation of Tosfos. Before we get to how the Shagas Aryeh explains the Gemara in Zvachim, he discusses the second Mahalach of Tosfos. So we had the two Mahalachim. One Mahalach, which basically was the bulk of the Tosfos, that sprinkling the blood before Shkia Zachama, means 72 minutes before Tzeis, is a Diraisa. Right? It was learned from this drush of this Imenu Inyan, as we just explained. And the second Mahalach was that no, Diraisa, you have until Tzeis Zachama. It's just a Durabanan. That was the second Mahalach. So, the Shagas Aryeh wants to know, according to that Mahalach of Tosfos, what would be the din by Tefilas Mincha? Because that's really what we want to talk about. Right? It happens to be we're going to end up talking about sprinkling the blood of a carbon. But what we really want to talk about, has an afternoon for us, and what we started the tshuva with, is when to daven mincha. So what would we do with this? If I have mincha is keneged the sprinkling of the blood of the carbon tamid, and the sprinkling of the blood of the carbon tamid, dioraisa I can do until tzeis, but derabanan I have to do by shkia. So then when would the sof zman tefilas mincha be? Would we say they were masaking it keneged the time that you sprinkle the blood? So whenever I can sprinkle the blood, whatever it is, if Chazal said I can only sprinkle the blood until shkia, so then I can only daven until shkia, because it has to fit exactly with when I can sprinkle the blood. Or would we say like this? No. It's keneged sprinkling the blood, and sprinkling the blood is really until tzeisa kochavim. Chazal didn't want people bringing karbanos to sprinkle until tzeisa kochavim, so they moved the sprinkling up until shkia. What does that have to do with davening? There's nothing to do with davening. That's a special din durabanan that has to do with sprinkling the blood. So therefore that durabanan doesn't carry over to the zman of tefillah, and therefore it could be even according to the explanation of Tosfos, that sprinkling the blood of the tamid is only until shkia. If we're going to say it's only durabanan, it could still be that the zman of davening mincha could be all the way up until tzeis. That's number one. And number two is the Shagas Aryeh takes issue with that explanation of Tosfos in general, because he doesn't like that last line that we saw in Tosfos. So Tosfos was explaining that this ends up being a case where there have midu devreihem b'makom kares, and Tosfos felt it's not a chiddush. The Shagas Aryeh says he feels that it is a major chiddush, right? That since we don't want people to delay sprinkling the blood, we're actually going to passel their carbon and not let them do it at all after shkia. The Shagas Aryeh feels that is a major chiddush, and therefore he does not agree with Tosfos that you could say this chiddush and not have it in the Gemara Pesachim. He says if this chiddush was true, it would have to be in the Gemara Pesachim. Therefore, because of that, he also disagrees with that second shot of Tosfos. Okay, so I think what we'll do now, we're coming maybe towards the end of tonight's shir, is discuss how the Shagas Aryeh understands the Gemara in Zvachim, and then what we're going to up next, but I don't think we're going to have time to start it tonight, is going to be to discuss that Gemara in Pesachim. There's a lot of Gemaras in Pesachim. So discuss that Gemara in Pesachim that was speaking about what Derech Rechoka is, the 15 mil and the 4 mil, and how we know that you can only shech the carbon Pesach until Shkia and not until Tzeis. That we'll see that Gemara inside with all the different opinions of how to understand that Gemara. That we'll see starting next week. But to finish up tonight's share, how does the Shagas Aryeh explain this Gemara in Pesachim? Because the Gemara in Pesachim did say Shkia, and right now all we have are two explanations of Tosos, both which we saw that Shagas Aryeh disagrees with. Right? One is that you have until Tchilas Shkia D'Oraisa, and the second Mahalach was you have until Tchilas Shkia D'Rabanan. However, Shagas Aryeh, he's going to explain the Gemara differently and say when it says Shkia Sachama, it means Sof Shkia Sachama, which really means Seisa Kochavim. That's the way Shagas Aryeh is explaining. So when it says you have the blood becomes possible at Shkia, it means Seisa Kochavim. That's the way the Shagas Aryeh explains. Now, Tosfos had a major difficulty with that because we have two psukim that teach us that you can't sprinkle the blood after Seisa Kochavim. One is the general pasuk of B'yom Tzavaso, which we saw Tosfos quoted, which is that all avodos have to be done during the day. You can't do any avodah at night. So if the cutoff time is Seisa Kochavim, that's just the regular, cutoff between day and night. Why do I need this extra pasuk of B'yom Hekrivu Azivcho? So he says, the Chiddush in the Gemara in Zvachim is to teach us that if you have a carbon chatas, which has 4 applications of blood on the Mizbeach, that all 4 of them have to be done during the day. Even though a chatas, which you put the blood on all 4 corners of the Mizbeach, as soon as you put the blood on one of the corners, the person bringing the carbon gets a kapara. The other 4 are a mitzvah, and you have to do them. It's a chiyuv to put on all 4 corners, but it's not ma'akiv the carbon anymore. If you only did one and then something happened to the blood, so the carbon is kosher. So maybe I would have thought that putting that first application of blood on the Mizbeach, that for sure has to be done during the day, because that's ma'akiv. But the other 3, maybe not. Therefore, this Gemara comes to teach us that no, you have to sprinkle all of the sprinkling of the blood on the same day that you check the carbon. And this is actually, says, borne out by a Gemara in Zvachim, Daf Lamed Chesam Beis, and we'll see it also clearly in the Rashi there. So the Gemara says, and this is the 5th Maramakom, Gemara Zvachim, Daf Lamed Chesam Beis, Amar Rav Yochanan says, Shalosh Matanos Shebachatos, the 3 blood applications of the chatas. What does he mean by the 3? He means after you did the first one, which is ma'akiv, now you have the other 3, which are not ma'akiv. So those 3, Einon Bos B'Laila, you can't do them at night. Ubos La'achar Misa, but you could do them after the person dies. Right? The din is that a chatas has to be brought while the person bringing the chatas is still alive. Right? Even though you don't necessarily need the person there to check the carbon and bring the carbon, because the kohanim do it. Right? The owner doesn't do it. But if the owner died, then the chatas is possible. And the chatas is going to be possible if the owner dies any time before the blood is sprinkled. But Rav Yochanan is teaching us that means he died before the first application of the blood was sprinkled. But once you put on that first application, if the owner dies, you can still put on the other 3. Because he already got the kapara with the first one.
What happens if you have 2 owners and one of them dies?
So that's a discussion whether what happens with the chatas as partners that one dies. That's explained in Pesachim Daf Nun Aleph. It's also good, so we're not going to get into it. Hamal behen b'chutz chayiv, and if he brings them outside, he's chayiv. Right? You can't sprinkle blood of a carbon outside the Beis Hamikdash. If the person does, he's chayiv kares. So over here, the question is, what's the deal with these 3, which are not the main applications of blood, but you do have to do them? So he says, no, that does count for that chayiv kares. Amar Papa explains, Yesh mehen kitchilaso, yesh mehen kisofo. Some of the dinim of these 3 blood applications are like tchilaso. Tchilaso means like the first application of the blood. And some of them are like sofo. What's sofo? Sofo, I think here refers to the pouring of whatever blood's left over after you put the blood on the mizbeach. You just pour onto the yesod hamizbeach. And that's not ma'akiv, and generally doesn't have any of the dinim of zrika sadam. Right, so these 3 are sometimes like a real zrika, and sometimes have the din not of a zrika. Chutz, to do it outside the Beis Hamikdash. V'laila, or to sprinkle them at night. Zaros, or to have someone who's not a kohen sprinkle them. Ukli sharis, or to do it not with a kli, which is kadosh, to be used in the Beis Hamikdash. Karen, that which has to be done on the corner of the Mizbeach. The etzban, it has to be done with the finger. Kibus, that which, if it goes on someone's garment, it has to be, there's special din of how to wash it out in the Beis HaMikdash. Vishirayim, and Shirayim, which I'm not 100% sure exactly what din that's talking about. I have an idea, but not 100% sure, I'm not going to say. Kitchilasam. So all of those are kitchilasam. Means for all of these dinim, it has the regular din of blood which is being sprinkled on his bath. It's like the first application. Misa, but if the owner died. Lo sharia, and that which it doesn't matter the meat. Lo mithaglan, it's not going to make the meat piggle if you sprinkle it with the wrong intention. Lo ayla gavai, and also if you bring the blood inside the heichal, it's a special din by karban chatos. If you bring the blood inside the heichal, the whole karban becomes possible. Right, the mizbeach is outside in the azara. You bring the blood inside where it doesn't belong, the whole karban becomes possible. It's a special gzeirus hakasa. So in regards to all of those dinim, kisofon, it's like the end, meaning it doesn't have the din of blood which is being sprinkled. So if I would take these three, or meaning any time after I sprinkle the first blood, the first corner with the karban chatas, I would then take this blood inside the heichal, it would not pass the karban. So these applications sometimes are like this, sometimes they're like that. But one of the dinim that we speak about is lila, right? This din that after Tzeis HaChavim, I'm not allowed to sprinkle these three applications onto the Mizbeach anymore. And what does Rashi say about this? Amar of Yochanan Sholosh Matanos Acheros Shebechatos, or Achronos Shebechatos, right? The last three applications. Ein Bos B'Laila, you can't bring them at night. Va'af al pi she'enon ma'akvin, even though they're not ma'akiv, means if you don't bring them, if you don't put them on the Mizbeach, the karban is still kosher. V'lo zrika gevurihi, and therefore it's not considered the main zrika. Mihu, nevertheless, dam nifsal b'shkiyas achama, the blood becomes possible at shkia, kedel kaman, like we're going to say later on Daf Nun Vav Amud Aleph, which is the Gemara that we quoted above. The ein malan gav mizbeach l'chila, therefore you can't bring them to the mizbeach l'chila. So we see a few things in this Gemara. Number one is that Rashi connects this chiddush to the drasha that we said on Nun Vav Amud Aleph. So therefore the Shagged wants to say that is the chiddush of the Gemara Nun Vav Amud Aleph, why I need that pasuk, that drasha, even though I already know that all avodos have to be done that day, is specifically for this chiddush of the three applications of the chatos, the three later applications of the chatos, where it's not clear what dinim they have. Some ways it's not like an avoda. In some ways it is like an avoda. How do I know that it is considered like an avoda as far as having to be done before Tzeis HaChavim? From that Gemara in Daf Nun Vav. That gufa is the chiddush, according to the Shagas Aryeh. Another thing you see from this Gemara is that it says, Einon Bos B'Laila. You can't sprinkle it at night. What's night? Night is only after Tzeis HaChavim. You wouldn't use that lashon if you couldn't sprinkle the blood after Shkia. Remember again, the whole sugya, the whole Shagas Aryeh is going within Shitas Rabbeinu Tam. Shitas Rabbeinu Tam is that Tchilas Shkia, 72 minutes before Tzeis HaChavim, is 100% day. It's not being a shrosh, it's not only 100% day. If we had a chiddush that there's a point in the day that you cannot sprinkle the blood after that point, then the Gemara should not use the wording of Einon Bos B'Laila, that you can't sprinkle it at night, because it's not accurate. You really can't sprinkle it already 72 minutes before night. So we see that the Gemara understands that the end time for sprinkling blood is Tzeis, and Rashi connects it to that Gemara in Zvachim Nun Vav. And so that's the way the Shagas Aryeh learns that Gemara, and according to that, right, so what comes out? According to that, you can sprinkle the blood of a karban, including the karban tamid, shel bein arbayim, can be sprinkled all the way up until Tzeis HaChavim, which, translating into our halacha, so until when can you daven mincha? You can have a mincha all the way until Tzeis HaChavim. So that's going to be the machlokas that we're going to be discussing. Right, we already discussed it a lot, and we're going to discuss it even more. That Tosfos and Rabbeinu Yonah seem to understand that you can only daven mincha until Shkia, 72 minutes before Tzeis HaChavim, and the Shagas Aryeh disagrees, and he holds you could daven mincha all the way until Tzeis HaChavim, 72 minutes after Shkia. Okay, stop here and continue next week.